our next session, titled Gaze Visual Media's Tryst with Indian Food, I would like to welcome Shubhra Chatterjee. Many of you might know her as History Wali to stage. Shubhra is a food documentarian, writer, and director who has traveled around India for the last 13 years to document its culture, history, and in particular, culinary heritage. She has created television shows like Chakle India, Kacha Rasta on NDTV Good Times, and Lost Recipes on Epic Channel, and directed shows like Ekant, Indiepedia, and Rainbow Rishta on Prime Video India, amongst many others. She's also the face of what was a popular Instagram live series called History on a Plate that sought to explore family histories around food.
So before we begin, I'd like to first thank, the Indian Culinary Agenda team for giving us all this platform and the last 2 days of the most engaging, stimulating conversations. Thank you for bringing all of us together. There's so many learned, wonderful, exciting people doing exciting work in this room, and it's been lovely to just engage in conversations. So thank you so much, Om, Tanushri, Priyadarshini, Ruth, all of you have been working so hard. Sankalp, Anshuman, the two ladies who've been manning the desk outside, like the entire team. And Rushina's not here, and I think Avantika is also not here. Who am I missing? Shamin, yes, of course. Thank you so much for giving us this platform. And yeah, I thought I'd just say that because we're at the end of it and we've had the most exciting discussion so far. What I am going to be talking today, along with my co-panelists, who I'll invite on stage, and I'll actually read out their introductions, and I've just got these reading glasses, like one day before I came to Delhi for this, and I'm still trying to figure out how to read through them. I turned 40 last month, and it's like an almost immediate thing. Like immediately, like I suddenly one day everything was out of focus on my phone. So yeah, so forgive me while I struggle with these. I have two co-panelists today. There is Rahee and there's Surajit. Will you both please join me on stage? Claps for them, please. And I'll read this out because I want to get it right. Surajit is, someone who does extremely interesting work in the space of, now, when you traditionally think of visual media, you don't think of museums. But, and that maybe is because we don't have too many food museums in India. But he's someone who's working, towards making food museums a reality. So I hope in a couple of years or from now on, when we think of visual media, we also think of museums as being part of that entire lexicon. So Surajit is, other than being someone I can listen to for hours, currently curator, Kerala Museum Kochi, and vice president of the International Agricultural Museums Association. He was formerly Associate Professor of Oral History and Community Knowledge in Ambedkar University, Delhi, and has been a visiting professor of video arts in the USA. He's also been the president of the Oral History Association of India and was on the public advisory board of the Society for Cultural Anthropology. Wow, that's quite a wonderful body of work you have there, Surajit. Right. Rahee is a friend. I think I can call Rahee a friend now. We've been trying to collaborate on something for the last 3 years, and finally seeing daylight very soon. Rahee is someone I admire greatly, is a writer who I wish would write more so we can read more of what he has to say. He's a writer, artist, researcher, and filmmaker based out of Bhubaneswar and New Delhi. His works have been exhibited in numerous venues, including the International Film Festival Rotterdam, Tribeca Film Festival New York, Archipel, if that's the right way to say it, Jakarta, Ishara Out Foundation Dubai, MAP Academy Bangalore, Arts House Melbourne, among others. He's been developing a series of creative non-fiction writings which are truly, truly fantastic, under the epithet To Be Dalit and Eat, which examine the complex interactions between caste and food. Right. So once now that the introductions are done, let's begin. I'm just going to test. Okay. Right. Okay. So this is. So I'm going to take just 5 minutes to, because it's the visual media we're talking about. I felt I needed the support of something visual. So I'll just take 5 minutes to sort of introduce the scope of what we're going to talk about and define a few terms. And then we shall go into the discussion. Gaze, I don't know how to be in front of a camera. I'm used to being behind one. Gaze, visual media's tryst with food is the topic, but what we're actually talking about is when you talk about visual media, it is very often supplemented by audio. There's very few times you have visual media which doesn't have audio sort of supporting it. So it's actually how audio visual media has, over the years, over centuries in fact, shaped our perceptions and choices around food. So this is essentially what it is that we are speaking about today. Before we begin, we want to just define what visual media is. Like, for example, I said we don't think of museums as visual media. So would you want to tell me what you think visual media is? Does film, television, any more examples? Would anyone like to? Social media platforms. Yes. Absolutely. Art also. Yes. Sorry? Masala box. Fantastic, actually. Yes. There's more. Also menus, don't you think? And how, like, packaging, hoardings. Absolutely. Everything, essentially everything is visual media. Spaces, how cities are planned. Urban planning is what you see and don't see is defined by how our cities are laid out. So everything, is connected to the idea of seeing. We see everything. That's how we, like, whether it's food or ideas around food, whether it's, whether you're buying something, you see it before you buy it, right? So the word seeing is very important. And I just want to take a minute to show you a few examples. I'm not going to be saying anything, but a few examples of what we have been seeing. So this, for example. Sugar, once a hero, now a villain. Right. So I just picked these out just to, bring to your notice that there's a lot that we see. There was, we spoke about, if you look below, this is by the Soda Pop Board of America. So they have funded the research. There was a whole session of research yesterday, but it's very important for one to realize that research is funded, and very often research is funded by corporations and organizations which have a vested interest in that research. So it is from their point of view. And then it is, of course, represented on visual media as such. In the Indian context, dalda is a very, very famous example, which I speak about very often. And because dalda, when it, was launched in the 60s and 70s, and it carried on into the 80s and 90s, the use of dalda, it was projected to be this form of pure love which a mother would choose if they cared for the child. But now we know otherwise. We know that dalda is actually, hydrogenated fats, and it is probably why a lot of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s today are having heart attacks before their time. So just keeping this in mind. The next thing I want to show is a video, so I'll need get behind what we see, because a lot of conversation today and yesterday has been about how there is a lot of misinformation.
ये है नानी माँ। खाना पकाने में नानी माँ ने हमेशा डालडा वनस्पति पर ही भरोसा किया, जैसा कि अब उनकी बेटी करती है, और उनकी नातिन भी यही करेगी।
डालडा वनस्पति इतना शुद्ध, 40 वर्षों से ममता की कसौटी पर खड़ा।
ममता की कसौटी पर खड़ा. But this is, guys, this is generational trauma. Like, दादी, नानी, मम्मी, बेटी, future भी वही होगा. So yeah, this is truly generation trauma. What I want you to also notice, because we're switching now, is to see how women are portrayed versus how men are portrayed in these advertisements. You see the women cooking and serving, and you see the men eating. There's another, we can play this, another Vanaspati ad, and I just want you to observe gender roles in this, because this is what you've been seeing.
खाओ गगन रहो मगन
गगन में तलो गगन में पकाओ गगन ही खाओ गगन ही खिलाओ
पहले भोजन फिर भजन पहले मंगनी फिर लगन
गगन में तलो गगन में पकाओ गगन ही खाओ गगन ही खिलाओ
सटक सीताराम गटक लड्डू
Also notice the pandit who is cooking, because the idea of purity is so important. So the cook has to have a tikka and has to be a brahmin.
जलेबी और हलवा तो
it is.
जलवे जलवा
काफी लंबा है, पहले ads लंबे होते थे. People had
आपके भोजन की तारीफ का राज गगन वनस्पति
yes. Right. So, still continuing, just to see how we see women and men on screen when it comes to food, is that the woman is only seen eating or consuming something when she's being a seductress. Everyone knows Katrina Kaif, Rasia, Slice. It's the only time that you've actually seen a woman consume something, right? Like I have a picture. Like I didn't put one picture. I just did like a search and I put all the pictures. But this is how you see women in the context of eating on visual media. And again, this is a very interesting observation. Rahee and I were discussing this yesterday, the screenshot from this movie, because I was trying to find images of women eating on film. And we realized that, Anushka Sharma may be eating over here, but in this film and in this scene, she is already operating outside the morals of what a good wife should be doing, because she's cheating on her husband. So a woman who's cheating on her husband can eat golgappa, but a woman who is a good moral wife is serving the food at home. So just this is what we've been seeing. Now there's another aspect to what we're going to discuss today, and that is the aspect of not seeing. While visual media shows you certain things, we also don't show you a lot of things, and that informs perceptions and decisions as well. For example, and this we're going to talk about, your supermarkets. Like, we buy food from supermarkets now. Everyone has sort of forgotten what food looks like beyond how you see it in the shop. Like, we all know sabudana, but what plant does sabudana come from? How many people would know that? Our generation may still know that, but how many children today would know that sabudana comes from sago or tapioca? They can't connect that to this. So this is what we are not seeing. And the thing to explore over here is, that by not seeing, are we also not seeing the story of the people producing this? Are we not seeing the story of the producer, the farmer? Are we able to ignore that? Because do we really know why the farmers are fighting for an MSP? Do we know the narrative there? Do we know what farmers in different parts of the country are going through? So there is a connection of, not seeing as well. I just wanted to show you a few more images of what we are not seeing. Because actually, the first time I saw apple trees, I was surprised, because in my head, there were always these things we drew in school, which were like big trees with apple. And apple trees are actually really skinny, small trees, and this is what they look like. Or the fact that the walnut is actually embedded inside a fruit, which is then, peeled and used to make dyes, and then you get the nut. This is what a walnut looks like, or this is what rajma looks like. You're used to seeing beans in a packet, but we've not seen, the plant. Who knows what like masoor ki dal ka plant looks like? What is the dal that, what is what is harvested? We know very little of that. So this was just to introduce the scope of the conversation, seeing, not seeing. I think we'll move to the fun part now, which is we'll move to the discussion.
Yeah, Shubhra, before you go into the questions, because I just remember this when you were doing the presentation. I think for most of us who've been in Delhi for a while, like one of the key sort of ad, like a visual ad, which sort of becomes a sort of functum of all the complex questions that we are trying to bring up now, is this particular image that we see behind autos, where there is a poor, decrepit looking farmer who's talking about how the Indian government is sort of ruining their livelihoods by taking away from the tobacco farming, right? And this is an ad perhaps most of us would have consciously or subconsciously definitely seen, because it's very, very widely publicized. And this is, by the way, much before the questions of farmer protests and so on and so forth even came into the picture, right? But when one goes deep into the image, and this was an absurd thing, right? How does such an image proliferate with such ferocity, right? And when one goes to the poster itself and sees a tiny asterisk underneath the poster, it says this is an ad sponsored by the Philip Morris cigarette company, right? And that's sort of where the mystery almost becomes right, where it is in fact not about the poor farmer in so many ways, right? It is about this sort of duplicity. It is about this sort of manipulation, right? Misinformation that's happening, right? So yeah, so I just remember that. So I thought yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because my first question to you, Rahee, was also going to be about, if you have any examples of advertisements you've seen of late which sort of shape our perception around the methods of buying, preparing, cooking and consuming food. Is there anything that you'd like to, yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and this is directly taking from where you ended, Shubhra, in the presentation, where there is an almost alienating effect that is being not just presented, but it's almost being propagated as the good way of consuming, which is where you forget how your food looks like, you forget the processes involved, and this is something that a lot of the non-vegetarian food vendors online constantly keep doing, right? Where there is this ad, I believe, from Fresh to Home, one of these companies, where they show that if you bring a fish from a fish vendor, and then cut it, there's this split screen, and then on one side of the screen there's a person who's actively procuring the fish from the market, and then cleaning it, partitioning it, and so on and so forth. And then on the other side there is this person who just gets neat tiny fish fillets from this company, this Fresh to Home company, right? And the person on the side who chooses to get it from the app is really happy, they don't have to do any labor, they don't have to do any of the interacting with the food outside of cooking it and eating it, right? And that is sort of propagated as the as the better option, right? Whereas for so much of Indian cooking, and especially cooking from the lower caste, the Bahujans, so much of the cooking has been about what in contemporary culinary scene is in vogue, called the nose to tail cooking, right? And to basically use every single part of the fish, every single part of the animal, right? To incorporate that into your cuisine, right? That's such a central aspect for so much Indian cooking, which is again marginal for horrible reasons. But the fact that this kind of ads are fundamentally doing away with that wastage, doing away with the fact that you don't not only do you not have to bring the fish head, you don't even have to think about it, right? So, and that's sort of accelerated as this good practice. And these kind of ads keep proliferating now more and more. Like, and that's true for even for, like, we were like yesterday discussing the Amazon Fresh app, right? Like, where you know, like, where there's this warning, you know, like, you don't have to get into the jhanjat of going to the market and, like, you know, haggling with the shopkeepers, and, like, you know, these evil people who are these shopkeepers who will try every single ploy to cheat you out of your money. This, like, you know, subsidy wala who's supposed to be this main villain, whereas this massive global corporation is supposed to be on our side, right? So that keeps happening. Yeah. So yeah.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And since you brought up, you know, the non-vegetarian food, there's this entire controversy that happened about 2-3 weeks ago about the veg non-veg delivery service by Zomato. And one tends to like want to question why even colors are associated with veg and non-veg. Like, who decides that veg is green and non-veg is red? I looked it up. It's actually FSSAI that has decided these colors. But there is now, like, even when you talk about colors, because you're an artist, like, there are certain color associations that have, you know, come into play. And continuing in this narrative, like, you know, for example, you know, the entire veg non-veg conundrum, I make food shows for a lot of television channels and OTT platforms, and one of the unspoken rules of censorship has always been that if you're doing a tabletop cooking show, your first segment, you can't show a non-veg recipe. Because जो non-veg audience है वो देखेगी, veg audience is going to tune off, or we won't get our viewership numbers. So I wanted to ask Surajit, because you work in the space of creating exhibitions around food and, you know, museums in the visual space, do you also face such challenges of unspoken, you know, censorship coming in to dictate what must be shown and how it must be shown?
Hi, yes, there is a fair amount of censorship. I mean, no one's ever going to say it, like, it's unspoken. But the feet tell the story, people will walk away, or they don't want to see it. It's kind of exhibitions in which this kind of situation happens. So if you want to tell the story about something which people haven't thought about, to me the important thing is to make a story that holds them. And I remember in central India, in a town, and central India is fairly, on the face of it, a vegetarian place. I mean, the elites always see themselves as vegetarian. But I wanted to kind of talk about the people who lived there, who were like 75-80% tribals and scheduled castes, Dalits, who are non-vegetarian. So I didn't want to start the storytelling by talking about plants and plant-based foods. I wanted to begin it from somewhere else. So then suddenly one day in conversation with a couple of colleagues who we were kind of collecting the material for it, conversation came up about what happens if all the birds, you know, that was the time about, if you remember, about 10 years back, there was this big thing about the sparrows are disappearing, right? And this was all over the country, and this is the time when the sparrows were not so visible. So it was on everybody's mind. So we pulled out this example from China. When Mao's great leap forward, he said, get rid of the birds. So they won't eat all the grain, and we'll have more grain to eat. And net result, China went through years of famine. So we brought in the story as a kind of little animated video with some footage from YouTube and so on and so forth, and put it out, you know, created like a make-believe forest in a place where the forest is 20 kilometers away. So bamboo and greenery and stuff, and got people to walk around it. But this was the kind of messages coming through. At the end of that experience, people wanted to talk about, so what else do people do with birds? What happens to the insects? And then you discover that so many people around you can tell you the difference about this insect is good to eat and this one isn't. You never had this conversation in the town of Piparia before, ever. And it happened for 2 months. So to answer your question, it's all about the story you make. You can bring up everything.
That is so true. It is entirely about storytelling, as we learned, and have sort of for the last 2000 years shaped how we see. Could you speak a little bit about that, about how, like codification, which happened 2000 years ago, is still shaping how we see and indirectly shaping our choices around food, or maybe directly, actually?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. And to go back to the point that you said about, like particular colors having particular impetus. And this is something that we actually discovered yesterday. I think like we were talking about how the rituals in a Bengali household and how masoor dal is supposed to, was it masoor dal? Yeah.
Yes.
Masoor dal was something that was seen as not particularly a pure veg food because it had red color, right? Like, and this kind of association of a particular color, a particular quality to a particular food, like whether like, and it has to be like, it can be very metaphorical and removed from the actuality of it, right? This is something that is deeply, deeply symptomatic of what caste is about, and and again, like, like there is this whole debate about like, like whether the caste is like a very rigid structure or is it amorphous. But then the thing is that like, it can be both, right? Like, and that's where the key factor comes in, like where, when you, for example, when you consume something that is prohibited by the Manusmriti, and like, like again, as a Dalit person, I have obviously like a very clear agenda against the Manusmriti, like, and I like continuing from Dr. Ambedkar, who actively burnt the Manusmriti as a text that needs to be rejected. And the Manusmriti is sort of like a beautiful text in the way that like, it almost codifies everything, right? Like it codifies like, and this is another thing that and I was actually trying to find a very explicit explicit like mentions of how the gaze interacts with food in Manusmriti, but like that is not exactly present. But what is present is a sort of conjunction of all the, like a sort of, if we make a composite of what the Manusmriti dictates, we would be able to like, extrapolate what it actually thinks of when like about seeing food, right? For example, so much of the segregation that the Manusmriti mentions is about like not eating outside of the purview of your own caste people, right? Like, and for a Brahmin man, it was supposed to be the Brahmin man just by himself eating, right? Like he can't even eat with like his own family members, let alone people who are like, who are from the other caste, right? Like, which is also the reason why whenever there's a, and Hindu families will attest to this, whenever there's a puja or like any kind of a function in their family, like the Brahmin always takes the grains or takes whatever food and then goes away, right? Like the Brahmin doesn't sit and eat with the people, right? And this is where the continuity like is, like so thoroughly invested in, right? Like, and that's the thing, right? Like and this is also something that becomes clear when we think of like how the Manusmriti talks about looking at people from other castes, right? And so like eating with people from other castes is something that can only be possible when you are allowed to look at people from the other caste, right? Like, but as history suggests, there were very active rules which in some really, really conservative empires was actually law, which is that, like the shadow or the like sight of a Dalit person is not something that a upper caste person can see, like, which is why a Dalit person had two options, whether one, you go out of the village before the upper caste person like wakes up. So like, so which is where like people had a lot of different timetables. People based on which caste you're from would have a different timetable and a very different like consumption circle, right? Like consumption logic, right? Because if you're a Dalit person who's getting out even before the sun rays hit the veranda of the upper caste person, your like the way you eat automatically becomes very different, right? So yeah, so that was one option. The other option was to have separate pathways, right? Like where the Dalit person would only have this circuitous route outside of the village main street, and that's the path that they have to take. And this is something again like like which we see very direct synergies with how city planning happens, how certain streets in even like places like Delhi, like South Delhi, how certain streets are allowed to have certain kind of like food shops, and how the idea of like cow gullies is something that comes up, which happens like in this like neatly tucked neatly tucked corner, and so on and so forth. So, like so much of it is actually so much of like, looking at food and consumption is about these really, really clear, lucid continuations of what Manusmriti actually mentions. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to continue that thought, Rohit, if you have to add something, just butt in the middle and let us know. But just continuing from that, uh, it's how also, again, I'm coming back to cinema because that is the field I operate in. Why is it that the villain is always seen eating meat, and the hero is always seen being that good mummy ka beta who eats, sattvic vegetarian food in a thali where everything looks the same, it's all brown things and you can't really make out what it is. So even this, I feel, is this way of seeing, like, I mean, Bollywood has sort of unwittingly cracked it, but this way of seeing is also coming down from centuries. It is the entire narrative of the devtas versus the asuras, and that asuras can and will eat meat while the devtas are Puritan and pure. So it's interesting when you try to break down what we see today as being a way of seeing that's been handed down over, generations to us on a platter, literally. We've spoken about seeing. We'll move to unseeing because I think we also have a time limit that we must adhere to. We'll move to the idea of not seeing, and I want Surajit to speak about this because when we were first talking about what we should speak about in this session, one of the things that came up, of course, was the idea of us being so far removed from what our food looks like in the field or when it's been grown, and that also being, if you connect it to us not knowing what is happening with the farmers or the producers of that food. So Surajit, I would just like you to elaborate on this a little more because you've worked so closely with farmers and at the agricultural museums. What is the gap that you feel is there, and is there a way to bridge this gap?
See, one of the funny things about food and farming is that we who eat the food we eat think that everyone knows. I mean, unless it's something special, everyone knows what we're eating. It's a dal, it's chawal, it's a sabji. Details mein kyun jana? We don't have to get into it. Similarly with the farmer, one of the most common things I have heard talking to farmers is, what's so great about what I'm doing? It's so everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. Hello, but the whole country is different. 10 kilometers is different from each other. Everybody knows it. So then one gets into tries to kind of get into specifics. In order to find out the specifics, sometimes it's useful to just track one item. And one of the things that we did in again, this example is from Central India. Spent some time in the uplands, the non-irrigated parts of the Satpura range, and just asking what is the oldest variety. People before there was kilograms of weight, there was pi and sei, the measures, baskets, and houses still have them, farming houses have them. So the question was, what was the oldest grain you've seen in this? And you're asking people from different age groups. And one expected, I was told a few names to listen for and so on and so forth. Others were given names. At the end of every day, day 1, day 2, day 3, what is the name that pops up first? Sola number. Sola number 16, coming from a village in the middle of nowhere. So what is this Sola number? It can't be a traditional seed. But everyone says it's the oldest thing they've seen in their sei or pi. You ask the local agriculture department, the college, they said, we have no idea. We've heard of this name. Some who know say we heard of the name. Most people said never heard of it before. Especially if you're in a place which is irrigated and the food comes out of water coming from a tube well or a canal or something. No idea. But then everyone says the grain that comes from uphill villages is much better in quality. So what's so great in quality? Oh, it looks like this, it smells like this. When it kind of fluffs up, it's so. I said, great, but why? Do you know what it's called? Nahi. They name the village rather than the grain. And this is from the Sates who kind of stock it in the market. It took us about a year and a half. Finally, somebody who farmed in that area in 1972 said, oh yeah, when I drove the tractor there for the first time, we were planting solar number. I said, where the hell did you get the solar number from? He said, I don't know, but you ask so-and-so, they'll be able to tell you. Finally, to cut a long story short, solar number was first released in the 1920s as one of the best seeds. India is divided into 9 agroclimatic zones by the agriculture department. And in the zone in which Vidarbha, northern Andhra and southern Madhya Pradesh falls, this was the seed that was released in the early 20s. That seed has disappeared from anywhere where irrigation has reached. Places where there's no irrigation, it's still that seed that emerges as the top of the pops. Knowing what does it tell us? It tells us not only the history of the grain, it also tells us about the politics of the food that we eat. Because as big money comes into farming, stuff that was good earlier is no longer seen as good. And then on top of it, if you're looking for local stuff, actually, local stuff doesn't necessarily mean it's traditional. It's something that people understood as being worthwhile. So I think that's suddenly 3 important things that emerge out of this one story. And
Right. No, that's actually a beautifully narrated example. I see what you were saying about storytelling earlier. But, coming again to, like, for example, this knowledge. There is a lot of knowledge. Of course, there's a lot of knowledge which has never been seen, but there's a lot of knowledge which is also being forgotten, right? I've made a whole career out of it with lost recipes. But what I want to understand is that, for example, the not seeing is, or the forgetting of things means that we don't know, we have lost knowledge that we used to have, which means it is easy for us to buy into misinformation. And there is a lot of misinformation, as was being discussed in the earlier session. Sadaf, I'm responsible for that, putting that Mahabharat story on, on the internet. I found it somewhere, but when I put it on the internet, I put it with the disclaimer that this is a myth. This can't be the actual story. But the discerning, whoever picks it up after that, there's no discernment of the information which is being picked up and what is being left. And I think it's becoming very easy to, just have these amazing stories and myths and not have actual history or facts attached with it, because we are forgetting what we used to know. Rahee, would you want to comment a bit on this and talk about, how not knowing of things is leading to this, a lot of misinformation being spread around the WhatsApp university, so to say, and because that is also visual media.
Yeah, I mean, I again, while I am a researcher, again, don't exactly have this sort of kaleidoscopic knowledge of food histories from India, but one of the things that I guess I'll say 2 experiences from my own life, which amaze people, and I'm quite shocked that these are amazing things that people really didn't know. One of the things is that I think almost all of us would know that the British condiment, the Worcestershire sauce was something that was invented in East India, right? So it was something that was invented in East India, but then it is something that still persists in the center of the empire, right? It continues to be deeply vital to British cooking in its capacity, right? But when we go to any mainstream conception of this object in East India itself, whether we think of Calcutta food or Bengali food or Odia food per se, this is not exactly something that we see or even think of. So how is it that something that becomes such a central, vital object for the empire? Because ultimately, all our food, choices have been driven by the empire, right? I'm sure the production of Sola number was something that was duplicitously used as an excuse to accelerate the famine, right? Like, so I'm sure that for the British to hoard the other varieties of rice, right? So in any way, like so much of our food choices were based on like the whims and flimsies of the empires that have ruled us. But yeah, how is it that this one particular condiment, like which is so vital to the empire's legacy, is something that we don't find anywhere else? But and this is something that was sort of jarring for me, because again, like as somebody who's from a lower caste community in and around the Chilika Lake, something sort of, like, I wouldn't say an equivalent, but yeah, like the whole woe of like producing a garum, which you put the fish in and put the salt in, and then you and then you let it ferment. The production of that garum is something that is quite common to our people, and and yet that is something that has completely been wiped off in some capacity, right? The other thing would be the fact that there used to be this like one particular caste which was pig herders, like, which obviously the Fundry, the film by Nagraj Manjule, speaks of this community itself, right? And this was like a very this was like a in the upper middle of the caste paradigm sort of community. So a lot of, and they were also very small in number. So due to pig herding no longer being a crucial fact of village life anymore, most of them have thankfully left that life, right? But the thing that again is shocking to a lot of people is the fact that these communities actually shared proximity with communities of washermen and fishermen and so on and so forth, where they would get coal from, and they would use that coal to smoke pork, right? And this is, by the way, happening in mainstream India. This is not the smoked pork of the Northeast as we commonly know, right? And this again is something that we have fundamentally forgotten, only because our histories don't allow for a particular kind of food article to even be considered historicizable, right? So yeah, I guess that perhaps answers some of your question.
Yes, it also, helps me jump to another thing which I wasn't really planning to talk about, but which sort of fits into the idea of exoticization. When I was having a conversation with Surajit, it just came up that certain foods which were common and everyday earlier have now been tagged exotic, and we opened up a big basket. Or Swiggy Instamart. And Surajit, you want to just talk about, the findings of what we see under the exotic section there. We found Nadru under exotics. We found Aloo Bukhara under exotics. So, and if any of you open up your Swiggy Instamart or Zepto on your phone, certain things have become exotic, which were part of the everyday earlier. And there are, the entire discussion which was happening on superfoods yesterday. But this is all knowledge which has been forgotten. And thus, it is easier now, I feel, to spread misinformation around this knowledge.
I mean, if I can... So, an example from when there were no apps and I had to go sourcing my food myself. I'm very interested in having pork. So, wherever I am, I would like to have some. So, I remember going in Agra, looking for pork. I used to work in a bank those days. So got transferred and landed up in this new city, and kind of, I was a bachelor, so looking around and said, where are you going? What are you looking for? I said, I'm looking for, मैं सुअर ढूंढ रहा हूँ, सुअर का मांस खाना है. Half the bank went like, what? And the other fellows, actually, funnily enough, I looked at a couple of faces and said, they've got what I'm looking for. It's not like mysterious to them at all, right? So I said, come, let's go and find. So they said, okay. So we went out. I discovered a few things even there, grades of pork. And it doesn't come by stuff written on a board. We stopped at a shop in which there was some a couple of pigs outside there, and it was clearly a shop. It wasn't anybody's house. So it had that board in front and stuff. So they said, why are you stopping here? I said, hai na? He said, Salim, maroge. You have that, you'll hold your stomach for the next 3 days. So I said, like, how? He said, listen to me, I'll take you to a place where you won't get sick. I said, so what do you mean? Like, serious, like, I'm having an intellectual discussion about why can't I eat the pig that I see outside that place? And he said, you shut up, do all of that later first. If you want some now, come with me. So we go to another place, which is actually, it was quite something because it was next to an open nala, the kind of nala you would see in any kind of poorer part of town, except that it upgraded itself from wooden shacks to a cement house, right? And in there was a shop in which I saw like a pig walking in and out of the doorway. He said, यहाँ पे मिलेगा अच्छा मैं बता रहा हूँ. I said, fine. You won't believe it. 6 months later, I had taken a room in that colony. It was damn cheap. It wasn't too far from where I had to go to work. And like, I'd made some good friends there because they were completely surprised. Who is this guy who's come to town and is looking for a place where he'll get pork? So the kind of conversations that opened up were like brilliant. And for me, I got some good pork. But it told me another thing. Outside that small group of, if I'm using the number 10 people in the branch, there were only 2 who understood what I was looking for. The world of food for those 2 was completely different from the other 10. There was no match whatsoever. So that was like learning number 1. About a year after that, I was posted to Dehradun. And as usual, I'm looking for something interesting to eat. So the guy says, what are you looking for? I said, यार कुछ मतलब हाँ बिल्कुल मिल जाएगा आपको क्या बकरी चाहिए ये चाहिए ऐसे नहीं यार बकरी नहीं चाहिए something else like Muslim कॉलोनी जाना मैंने कहा नहीं यार I'm looking for some pork I'm looking for suar ka meat यार wait 1 second he's not phased out and this is in Paltan Bazaar in the center of Dehradun. You won't expect all of this conversation happening there. I am introduced to 3 people who are having a debate amongst themselves, where can we get this guy the best pork? Right? And suddenly what's opening out to me is actually the kind of food we feel is like the food that people should eat totally depends on who you are. Right? And these kind of little introductions I've had in my life because of my particular interest in food, of like which I know is like off the beaten track, so I also look for that kind of thing, has opened up many windows into that. I mean, and just the last one in this one, so I'm in Mon in Nagaland, and I know like I usually would get everything I would expect to get, and I'm coming back from work one day, and just at the steps of this hostel where I'm staying, there are about 4 police walas on their knees, the guns to one side, sticking some danda in some hole in the ground. What in the world is happening, man? Why are you putting little, like, they're not even done. When I go closer, I discover they're actually leaves, long, right, thin, grasses type. What are you doing? Oh, we're catching termites. I said, oh, wow, all right. So they catch 2, 4, 6, pick it up and put in a hubcap of a car. Like they're dropping the termites they've caught into the hubcap of a car. And I'm saying, I'm saying, now what? He says, we'll eat it. So I'm like completely mystified. How would you eat termites like this? He said, where you go? So I asked him like, curiosity, like I would like to eat it. If you can eat it, obviously you're not dying, so I will also not die. So what can we do? So he said, come, there's that fellow there, we just go to him. So like quite a few are plucked and on that hubcap. We walk across about 100 feet and there over an open stove, they are popping termites on a stove. They literally, it's like non-veg popcorn. It's brilliant tasting, man. It's too good.
Yeah, to just like add a short point like to what Surajit said, like like you use the phrase "off the beaten track," right? Like, I mean, I think that's where the crux lies, right? Like, because for statistically the majority of population in this country, like, this is not the off the beaten track, is it? Like this is our life world. This is our everyday, right? Like so I mean, I obviously it's like again, like not exactly hard. Like it's not just hard. It's like I don't even have to have a second thought to understand the fact that like no matter which place I go to in like no matter which city I go to, there is a very solid chance that there is pork there. Like there is a very solid chance that there is buff available there, right? Like and that's the life that so many of us grow with. Like that's the these are not strategy, right? Like these are everyday facts for again like the Bahujan in this country, which like around 85% of the people, right? And the fact that that is something that needs to be highlighted as an off the beaten track, that sort of is where the vast asymmetry in power relations in this country lies, right? And that's where the not seeing also manifests itself. Yeah.
Absolutely. I am not allowed to show beef on television. 18 crore Indians, by a recent survey, I think that figure is 18 crores, eat beef, but I can't show beef on TV. I'm allowed to show pork. I have not been allowed to shoot in the Northeast because the food of the Northeast is exotic. So you can only shoot the food of the Northeast, and I was seeing a television program made in India about 5 years ago where they were talking about the stinkiest food you find in India. So that is the lens with which you are allowed to show the food of the Northeast, but I can't go there and look for lost recipes of the Northeast or show what is eaten. And while some of this censorship comes from policy, or unwritten rules, actually mostly, I've never seen it written anywhere, but it's been told. All television channels have a S&P department, which is like a policy department, and all shows go through them before they're broadcast. But a lot of it also has to do with what the audience wants to see. And that is something which one needs to reflect upon, because like you said, 85% of the country, the food of 85% of the country is not in the mainstream, has never been seen. You only see Lucknow, Mumbai mein ye milta hai. These are the top 10 places that you should go to. Purani Delhi mein ye chaat milta hai. Kolkata mein ye milta hai. Now some people are talking about Mangalore and Madurai and some more cities, but the food narratives that we see, and even as, not just mainstream media, but also social media are very focused on the mainstream narratives, or the food of the privileged 15% of the country, the food of the upper caste. So that is something that we as audiences also need to reflect upon, because media will only be created for viewers, and if there are no viewers for a certain kind of media, we can't create content because there's nobody funding that content. So having said that, I think it's time to open up for questions. So if anyone, yes.
It just, maybe I should, put the question for everybody on the panel. We have seen a lot of things on visual media, continues to be. There's a lot of misinformation, continues to be. I mean, there is cake cornflakes and without sugar cornflakes. When you actually start to eat it, there is a lot of sugar in it, and we all know that. Where are the counter narratives? And if there are no counter narratives, why not?
I think the reason why there are no counter narratives is because in order to create a counter narrative, you need to know where it's coming from. If you're seeing the same starting point, which is a packet, then it's going to be really difficult to look at counter narratives, to think of counter narratives. Which is why one of the things, when we met Tanushree and Om for the first time, and I remember talking about, when you're talking about food, we are talking about the end product. I think we should talk about the plant as well. Because if you miss out on the plant, you miss out on an entire ecosystem. And your counter narratives, the other ways of looking at it, entire histories, all of that disappears.
Somewhat, but I think it requires a lot of collective thinking and a lot of cohesive voices to come and say, we're going to challenge this. This is not right. Maybe this forum is a great way to start, but to say, you know what, I don't agree with this. This is not right. Because there's a lot of counter narrative for gender. Now that you see mothers are not serving food. So maybe, you know, all of us in our own little spaces need to start those counter narratives so that people at least know that there's another side.
Rahee, do you want to talk about the work you've been doing to, talk a little bit more, or what Bao has been doing, for example, to talk about food narratives which haven't been...
Sure.
Yeah.
I think to briefly go back to the question, I think the rift in how far we need to go is symptomatized by the fact that someone who calls themselves a rationalist in this country is seen as a dangerous person. To be a rationalist again gets you killed, as was the case with Gauri Lankesh, right? So I think we need some kind of a rationality to steep into everyday life for that kind of a counter narrative to even emerge, and the fact that someone who calls themselves a rationalist is a threat, that just shows how far away from even being able to collectively think in that capacity we are at this point. Right. Having said that, so to go back to what Shubhra was saying, I think there's some kind of a counter narrative situation that some of us who are online creators who deal with the question of food are doing, where we do constantly and there's this illustrator who's also a co-conspirator in so many ways, called Big Fat Bao, who has this series about how food and how the visuality of particular foods interacts with the public every day, right? I guess these can be called counter narratives, but Shubhra, I really don't think that. I think that's just being a micro niche in the internet space is not exactly something that allows us to develop some kind of a cohesive strategy. I think it's just a matter of those 10-15,000 people who are interacting with our work. So I share a deeply cynical view about that. I don't think that this would lead to some solid counter narrative in that capacity. Yeah.
We need a starting point. We always, every revolution, every revolution needs a starting point. And like we were discussing, Rahee, the fact that the word caste is coming into conversations around food and has been coming in through the day today and yesterday is because there is a counter narrative that has been, bubbling, especially in the last 5 years, maybe. So there are counter narratives which are, emerging, and if the thing is, one has to be interested in locating them and promoting them and pushing them forward. So it's not that there are not counter narratives, there are many, like food and gender. Shireen has written a wonderful piece on food and gender, but I don't know how many of you have read it. So that is a counter narrative that is there. It's available on the internet to view, to consume. A lot of people from smaller towns, from parts of India which are not represented in mainstream media, are putting forward their food. They are sharing what they eat every day, and it is up to us to push that narrative further if we want to see more of it. This needs just more than that 10-15,000 people. It needs a few lakhs of people to push it forward, maybe more. So there is counter narratives, is what I feel. I think we need support from the audience to be able to push the counter narratives further.
I think I would also because we're talking about the visual media, I think there is a very historic movement in Paranjit's Sarpata Paramparayam, where the hero basically goes out of his path to go to a specific restaurant where he gets beef biryani for his wife. So, and this was monumental in so many ways, not just through the lens of caste, but also through the lens of how a husband loving his wife is shown on screen. So I guess in that capacity, I think there are some filmmakers who are now bringing in these questions, especially filmmakers who happen to be from a progressive lens.
Right.
Yeah.
You have a question for that?
Yes, I have mic as well. This question is regarding the first half of your conversation, we were talking about the seeing and the unseeing part. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, or maybe not. So this is open for all of you. We've been talking about different kinds of narratives when you showed the advertisements, right, and how you see women like the Pandit showing as a pure, and then and he is the business person. And then suddenly you hear the lady voice, which is then home cooking, right? So that's another perspective as well. My question is on the veg and non-veg, right? So the entire, I'm not saying it's a matter of discussion. I'm talking about a vegetarian meal, and here's the whole community of a meat eater who are called the non-vegetarians. In a way, what you talked about censoring, right? The whole community of meat eaters are called the non-vegetarians. These are not the vegetarian, and they're not called the meat eater. All the other way, not the vegetarians are not called the meat eater, whatever. So am I reading too much into it, or is just one of things that where we say veg and non-veg? And especially when you are doing a lot of your research and older books and older documentary you have come up with, have you ever seen it? Because you know, this whole discussion about, oh, the English people call everything as curry. I don't necessarily, I'm not against it as well. But it's a similar thing here as well. Like, oh, us people calling every meat as non-vegetarian.
Yeah, I think it's there. Amish, Niramish, yeah, is the same concept from...
Niramish emerges from the main word here is Amish.
Right.
Niramish means absence of that.
Absence
so it's a diet which doesn't have meat. We have inverted it in our conversations in the modern times, where the main axis now is the vegetarian diet. And the non-meat eaters, but the fact is the meat eaters are also eating vegetarian.
Yes.
Right? We are vegetarians by people. But the axis has changed.
Yeah.
Meat Amish is actually meat.
The not meat, yeah, the absence of Amish.
The main word here is Amish.
Are there any more examples in other languages that could point to this? What is veg or non-veg in the language you speak? Masahari. Yeah. They're equal. Yeah, there is no leaning towards, yeah. The concept of vegetarian and non-vegetarian is Indian, so to say. Yeah, and that's not surprising because language, like the words, like you were discussing in your panel in the morning, in India, the possession of the idea of education and reading and language has belonged to a largely vegetarian Brahmin upper caste, right? So the fact that certain words are, like words like non-vegetarian, vegetarian are created where the non comes into the vegetarian is not really surprising. And I think it is also informed by the fact that most of Indian media, print, broadcast, radio, now there are, people, from underrepresented communities coming in, but for a large period of time, it was largely the privileged upper caste vegetarian who were running these stations, radio stations and television stations, and authorship of, books and content houses. So it's interesting to see how a language of food has also been created, which is from that gaze.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure about the veracity of this, but from whatever little I've learned, is that the Rig Veda did not divide food into vegetarian, non-vegetarian, but into three, into Sattvic, Rajasvic, and Tamasic. So one is like pure energy giving, pure, which is fruit, vegetables, milk, and the other is energy giving, like root vegetables and maybe seafood. And tamasic is what translates into hell, which is organ meats, meat, fermented foods and all that. I don't know how true this is from whatever I have studied. So I just wanted to know, since all of you are all scholars, if you can tell me please if this is correct, because it wasn't veg and non-veg. In fact, I did a television shoot with Gordon Ramsay, and I told him he's got a violent temper because of the rubbish he eats. So he was, of course, very upset. But I don't know, is this true that even in the Rig Veda there is no such thing as veg and non-veg?
Yeah, I wouldn't be so sure like if it's Rig Veda itself, but this is obviously definitely the case in the Bhagavad Gita and the Anusashana, the administrative wing of Mahabharata. So this is definitely true in later texts. Not sure about Rig Veda.
So that was the Ayurvedic text, yeah.
But medical.
Charak Samhita,
Yeah, Charak
yes.
Samhita. Yeah. Yeah, it is in Charak Samhita, which is again much later than the Manusmrita, and the Rig Veda is the first one. Rig Veda is the first, like, earliest
So that
text.
didn't say that.
Yeah, no. Rig Veda, like, didn't
So
really
I
have.
just got a Goli to Gordon Ramsay.
Okay.
I didn't ancient
No.
texts.
Yeah, right. No, all of them are obviously ancient texts, but like, yeah, it's not as old as the Rig Veda. Like, it's around 200 BCE is where the dates for both the administrative wing of the Mahabharata as well as the Manusmriti are, and Charaka Samhita and all are obviously much later, right? So the, like, these distinctions are definitely made in some of the ancient texts like of India. But I think that the fact that the most violent people in this country are the pure veg eating right wingers.
Hitler was vegetarian.
Sorry.
Hitler was vegetarian.
Yeah, of course. Like, but again, like, we don't even have to go back to Hitler. Like right now in this country, the mob is that of pure vegetarians, right? Like, so that sort of clears it out as to whether it's true or not. Yeah.
Right, I think we have to close the session because we're out of time. But thank you, and let's continue speaking over tea and coffee because there's lots of interesting things that have come up and I want to talk about it. So, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.